Yeah. So, as I say, my name is John Dean, Sheffield Ham University. If you want to look up anything about me, my various details are on here. Any questions from this? I'm happy to. We're recording, so that's absolutely fine. But if people want the slides and the links within them, then please email me, or I can share them with Suzanne, and she can share out amongst the group. And you can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter or my website if you want to. And just to say that breakout task was borrowed from Caitlin Lawson, who's a professor of digital ethnography in the US. So we were interested in social media and charity in social media. And because the feeling is that UK charities are slightly behind the curve when it comes to embracing digital and all the benefits that digital has. You'll see numerous essays at the minute on what does AI mean? What does ChatGPT mean for the voluntary sector? And I think a lot of people read it and go, yeah, all right, that's too difficult. We'll put it in the too difficult pile and we'll move on. And there obviously has been a huge amount of take up of various sites like Just Giving or Virgin Money Giving and social media sites. But that hasn't always lent itself to rigorous analysis. And it's sometimes often been the bigger charities that have done better with the digital than smaller charities. At the same time, who's most likely to use social media? It's young people. So I wanted to sort of start with a little bit of as a sociologist, why is this interesting? This is a chart of a large American survey of 12th graders, 10th graders, and 8th graders, the pink, blue, and dark blue lines there. And what this is a measure of happiness of American children, various ages, 13 to 18, over the past 30 years. And what you can see, and lots of different measures show this, is that young people throughout the 90s and early 2000s were getting happier. And then since 2010, there was a spike. And then since then, generally, young people have found themselves to be getting unhappier. And that spike in 2010 obviously correlates with the great financial crisis of 2008, which led to a lot of austerity, for example, in the UK, and quite a lot of economic industrial churn in the United States and a growth of radicalism. And so that's one of the reasons. But the other reason that people put this down to is that 2010 is when people really got smartphones, when smartphones went from being not a core concern to something that everybody, and particularly every young person, has. And it's not as simple to say that the decline in youth happiness has been because of smartphones and social media, but the two things do go hand in hand. It's difficult to say there's correlation, causation, but there's definitely correlation. Academics are sort of in disagreement, it's fair to say, about has social media been good or bad for young people, particularly in terms of their mental health. Large meta studies of the data show little to no impact, but there is huge methodological debate reigning about how well you can measure that. And a lot of people still feel that there is definitely a connection between the amount of time young people are spending on social media and how happy they are. At the same time, social media has changed young people's attitude towards charity, volunteering, and activism. This was very easy to pull 4 headlines off the internet, all about how young people are changing activism, how social media and youth activism is changing, how this is from Teen Vogue, I think, social media transformed teens' ability to build activist movements online. So at the same time as there's been that problem that social media might be hampering young people's mental health and their ability to live full, effervescent lives, at the same time there's a feeling that the charity sector, or certainly the social movement sector, has benefited from the greater connectivity that exists. And I think anybody who's part of a network maybe related to mental health or disability or trans rights will go, well, there has been I get a huge amount of support online, peer support networks, the readily availability of social connection now that exists through Zoom and video sharing platforms means that the internet has positives as well as negatives. You can find someone out there quite easily who is suffering in the same way that you are, and access help in that way. We've also seen various campaigns, Black Lives Matter, hashtag BLM, or the hashtag #MeToo movement, focused on gender inequality and racial inequality, that have flourished online, that have been able to reach people in such mass ways, bypassing media that was more reticent in many ways, getting stories out there. The sharing of body cam footage is now not dominated by the media, for instance, so therefore people are able to see incidents of racial injustice, for instance, in the United States much quicker. So suddenly social media offers this opportunity to bypass traditional communications areas. At the same time, within charities, you've had things like Movember, which has become huge due to the focus on sharing photos of men growing mustaches during November in order to highlight men's health issues, such as alcoholism, suicide, gambling addiction, and prostate cancer and testicular cancer. Anyone know who it is in the top right and what they're doing? That's Lady Gaga not wearing any makeup as part of the hashtag No Makeup Selfie campaign, which encouraged young women especially to take a photograph of themselves not wearing makeup as part of a body positivity campaign. And at the bottom, you might recognize this one. This is Bill Gates having a bucket of ice water tipped on top of his head as part of the Ice Bucket Challenge. The Ice Bucket Challenge was for ALS, which is a form of motor neurone disease. And someone who had motor neurone disease said, it's like constantly having a bucket of ice water tipped over your head. That's the feeling I get. So therefore, there was this online challenge where people were nominated to tip a bucket of ice water over themselves. It went crazy. Lots of celebrities got involved. And ALS, which I think until that point was raising about $1.5 million a year, raised about $115 million that year. And it was the most successful fundraising campaign that they'd ever run. And it led to, I think, significant changes, significant developments in the actual research into ALS. When I've presented at this work before, I have had people from charities come up and say, I came to listen to you because I wanted to know what the next Ice Bucket Challenge was. And I don't have that, I'm afraid. And I think lots of organizations you can see online are sometimes try and think, right, what can go viral? What can we do that goes viral? And I think the truth of that is you don't know. You never know what's going to go viral. You never know what's just going to hit that spark at the right time. And whether that's a positive thing like the Ice Bucket Challenge or a negative thing like the neck nomination challenge, where people were challenged to drink something horrendous very quickly. The internet sort of sets its own rules. It doesn't come with a guidebook that tells you exactly what is going to work and what doesn't going to work. And that's sort of quite important for this research. So young people love social media. 96% of 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK regularly use social media. And we very rarely find 96% of people doing anything. So that is a huge amount. I speak to, in some of my students, I spoke to my second year students earlier a couple of weeks ago. And one of them said they were on 6 different social networking sites. I couldn't even name 6, I don't think, but I think if you add Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Be Real. Be Real is a new one, where apparently every day you just have to take a photo of yourself, whatever you're doing. So there is a certain amount of obsession, I think, and a certain amount of dominance over what people are doing. Various reports as to what charities should be doing about this is that young people should be engaged on their own terms in order to avoid being left behind, i.e. you shouldn't try and you have to have a youth focus. You can't just do what you've always been doing. You have to think about how particular to engage young people. And why is that important? It's because actually giving is a habit. We know that people get into good giving habits. Donating, volunteering, micro-volunteering, campaigning, being involved in raising awareness, sponsorship. Sorry, I've got a tickle. Excuse me. They're things that people get into a habit of doing and continue doing. And once that habit is lost, just like voting, I suppose, once the habit of voting is lost, you often don't get it back. And so being involved in charity, saying yes to things is very important in terms of building long habits. So therefore we could see it if we miss a generation, just as we're worried at the minute about the COVID generation of school-age children who might have missed a certain amount of learning. If you miss a generation in terms of getting them to involved in civic participation, that can have significant problems in the future. And we might, with the Community Life survey that came out a couple of weeks ago, we've seen that there is being a bit of a drop-off in terms of how many people are getting involved in things. Young people generally feel better about themselves when they donate. There's a positive story to be told there that whereas it can be a bit of a nothing-y experience giving a donation when you're an older person, younger people actually do feel a sense of positivity that they're contributing and doing something. And actually they're more responsive to asks. They're more likely to go from a no to a yes if asked than people of older age ranges. So therefore, again, there's a reason why being slightly more in their face or slightly more positive and outreachy when it comes to young people can have an impact. More recently, there was a report by Barclays Bank, which actually showed that while young people aren't donating very much money, they are more likely to donate in the last year than older people. I don't think this data necessarily tallies up with the Community Life data, though, so I would put a bit of a proviso on it. But 90% of 18 to 24-year-olds donated to charity over the last 12 months compared with 80% of the rest of the population. So while they might be giving less, they may be giving more frequently. And so therefore that's a more positive story to involve. And they're also most likely to opt for digital donation methods such as contactless payments, texts, or QR codes. But ironically, because young people are more likely to be out than people over the age of 25, they also actually give more cash in the street than anyone else. Yeah, so 55 to 64-year-olds are found to donate the least, 18% below young consumers, which again counters the story of young people's selfishness, which I think sometimes comes across in various different ways. And again, if you want to access that, that's from a Barclays corporate report called A New Giving Landscape. So I've written about charity from a sociological perspective, and particularly how charity is a good thing. And the fact that it's a good thing helps, can be a way that people try and build their reputation. So charity is a marker of goodness in many ways. For example, Beckers and Bauman write about how young people say, you can believe I'm a good person because I volunteer. We encourage young people to do volunteering because volunteering looks good in the CV. Employers are more likely to employ people who have volunteering on their CV than not volunteering, because volunteering says, well, clearly I'm trustworthy, I'm good, a bad person wouldn't do this. So volunteering is a shortcut to goodness in some ways. The problem with that is social media is a bit of a tricksy arena where the performance of goodness can go wrong, where if you say, oh, look at this nice thing that I've done. Oh, I've just finished my volunteering at a homelessness shelter. It can come across as irritating or boastful or misguided. It's what's known as humble bragging, where you try and say something genuine about something that you're pleased about. Oh, look, I'm really happy about the volunteering in this Taiwanese orphanage I've been doing, and it just comes across like you're showing off in some way. And within sociology, that's known as context collapse. So Marwick and Boyd write about social media being a place of context collapse. So why something being written on a Leeds United fan group message board might be considered absolutely fine. If someone was to look at that from the outside, they may go, well, you're clearly a horrible person, or Leeds United is absolutely awful. If you say something positive on a Facebook group, it can look like showing off to someone else. Once you press enter and send it out into the ether, you have no control about how it's going to be interpreted elsewhere. You've suddenly sort of let go of your ability to control the situation. And that's led to things like, if any of you have read John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which is about how this sort of story from a while ago, a woman was on a flight to Africa and she made a joke before she took off about Ebola, about not getting Ebola. It's a nasty little joke. But by the time she landed, she'd been sacked from her company. There were people giving her death threats online. She'd been turned into this famous character, etc., and so on. So you end up in this situation where social media means you don't have control about how people interpret your messages, where impressions cannot be fully managed. At the same time, you've got the concept of raising awareness. And a lot of charities use social media to raise awareness. They ask their supporters to raise awareness, where people might know of an issue, but not about an issue. We know that, there's a lot of stuff on prostate cancer, for instance. If you follow football, prostate cancer is around. I think a lot of football fans will know, I'm increasingly aware prostate cancer is something men should think about. Do I know the rates of prostate cancer? No. Do I necessarily know what I'm meant to be looking for? No, not really. Do I know what can be done about it? Do I know what the treatment is? No, I don't know any of that, but I know that prostate cancer increasingly is something I should be aware of. Some people like Sarah Moore wrote a really interesting book called Ribbon Culture. It was people who wear ribbons on their lapels, encouraged to wear ribbon. Also, the other one would be the wristband culture around Make Poverty History around 2005. There was a huge wristband culture. People would compete to see how many charity wristbands they could be wearing at any one time. And she says that this is just about presentation of self. People are sort of competing to appear compassionate and engaged in humanity, rather than engaging in serious contemplation of the suffering of a certain group. She says, I asked one interviewee who'd worn a number of ribbons and charitable tokens whether she saw herself as a supporter of the causes for which she wore tokens. Oh, I wouldn't go that far, she replied. So you've got this problem, this offline problem of people using the fact that being associated with a charitable cause makes you look good, and suddenly you're transferring it online, where people are even more likely to perhaps show off or frame their presentation in a certain way, and so therefore it gets more worried about. It's another way of putting this. When you do social media, you get to take your photo. So if you want a selfie for social media, you can take it 5 or 6 times. You can take it again and again and again until you look your best. You can then edit it. You can add filters to it. You can smooth off the rough edges. You can make sure that it's perfectly framed and you look your best. And everyone who uses social media is doing that to a certain extent. Everyone is thinking, right, which picture is going to make this look the best or is the most suitable? And so why should charity on social media be exempt from those rules? And that's sort of the question that we wanted to explore. So I've spoken for a bit too much. My throat is going, I'm afraid. But what I'd like you to do is, I'll put this in the chat. I'll just end sharing my screen. we created a fake Twitter feed. Called Digi Charity Shoe. And we ran a series of focus groups where we asked young people to explore this Twitter feed and then got their feedback on it. So what I'd like you to do is, well, maybe now is a good time for a short comfort break. If people need the bathroom or want to grab a drink, I certainly need a throat sweet of some kind. What if people would spend 5 minutes exploring that page, have a look at some of the links that we've put on that Twitter feed, have a look at some of the videos or some of the web pages that it links to, and think about how you experience that. And then we'll come back, we'll discuss it, and I'll talk about the methods involved in the study. Should we say 5 minutes for a bit, and then come back to some of the other points that have been raised. So we did what we've asked you to do there. We ran a series of focus groups where we went in and gave young people iPads where they could read this Twitter feed, and they could click through on links, and they could watch the videos, and they could think about it. Quite eight small focus groups, about an hour each, 37 participants in total. I'll go through the sample in a minute, but I'm far from positive about the sample. I think there's significant limitations with it, but this was very much an exploratory exercise to try and figure out really if this method worked or if this approach worked. So 20 people identifying as female, 17 as male, ages between 18 and 25, with a group in the middle around 21, 32 white British, 2 British Asians, 3 Eastern European, a mixture of where they were. They were all students from Sheffield Hallam, so they were mostly students from Sheffield Hallam. And then a split between employed and unemployed. So that sample is not representative. It's not representative of Sheffield Hallam, and it's not representative of young people. But again, it was about getting some initial thoughts. And perhaps more interestingly, these are the sites that they were signed up to. I think if we did this again today, the Facebook number would be far lower. Generally, Facebook now is something used by your aunt to talk about her cats. It's not a young person's tool at all, really. And things like Tumblr and Reddit have died out, and TikTok and BeReal have emerged. So again, that's always quite fluid. But it might also be that, given various policy changes at the minute, that TikTok's about to die in various different ways, given regulatory changes. So something new will be on again. So we gave them this, and what we found, and I'll hold my hands up here, that the Twitter feed element of this didn't really work. It worked as a jumping off tool. It worked as a starting point to get some discussions going. But the idea of it being quite a digitally interactive session quickly turned into, oh, that has made me think about this. Let's talk about that. So, for example, there's a few stories on that feed about the no makeup selfie. Let's talk about the no makeup selfie. Let's talk about whether we think that this was a valuable thing. How did I react to it? How do my friends react to it? What do I think about it? So this is about that thing on the feed that you'll see a lot of, which is retweet to spread awareness, or share to show you care. And I think my overall feelings in terms of the findings can be that sharing isn't caring. Sharing has become such a unthinking activity that you might just see something and share it and move on, as something that you just do in the blink of an eye. That to share material online, young people think, well, that's not really caring, even though the charity might be saying, well, we just want as many retweets as possible to spread awareness, to try and get links out there. Even if you're not clicking on our website and looking at our materials, or certainly donating, as long as you're sharing this tweet or this Facebook page, that's enough. And so there was a bit of that. I do think it's good, because even if you can't donate, you're enabling others to donate. It's more likely that if more people see it, more people give money. So even if you're not giving your money, you're helping it out to a visible platform. And then there were some very positive comments about the ability, especially in times of crisis, for social media to offer a benefit. So this is a very singular example, I suppose, of someone's experience of using social media. So his sisters were at the Manchester Arena when the bomb went off at the Ariana Grande concert, and this really kind lady brought them home. My mother put a post on Facebook and got something like 22,000 shares purely to find this lady and thank her. They did eventually. It shows you in a different context, then people will share it. So it's about this sort of community altruism benefits of social media that you can't quite predict. But that, again, is relating to such a esoteric case. It's relating to such a one-off that you can't really build a sort of charity fundraising or digital strategy out of it. So when people are talking about the positives of this sort of material online, those are the sort of things we say. But when asked generally about their experiences of giving and charity on social media, the conversation was relatively negative. It was quite critical, and maybe that comes from the fact that they were often social science university students who'd had a certain amount of cynicism pushed into them by their degrees. But in general, there was this feeling of, I think it's so much crap, a lot of people following a trend. So this idea of things like the no makeup selfie or things like the ice bucket challenge, that the idea is people aren't doing this out of some sort of genuine altruism, but they're doing it just because everyone else is doing it and they feel that they have to. Now, there might be, when it's a fundraising cause like Ice Bucket Challenge, well, who cares? Why does it matter? The money given by someone who doesn't care is worth exactly the same in the bank account as the money given by somebody who does care. What you want with any of that sort of viral campaign is it to keep rolling and keep generating its own sort of force. It's not really about how much any individual one person cares about it. There was a really interesting study done of about 9,000 people who completed the Ice Bucket Challenge. That it was found that of the people who did the bucket over the head but then didn't donate, those people scored significantly higher for character traits of narcissism when judged in various psychology personality tests. So there was this feeling, this undercurrent amongst the young people we spoke to, that people on social media are always trying to take advantage of you in some way. And in this case, are trying to take advantage of your emotional manipulation in some way. The idea that even their friends, people they like, people they trust, might be trying to present themselves in a certain light rather than anything else. When somebody says something like retweet to show you care, that really dilutes the purpose of charity, because we all click that thing and think, well, I've done my bit now, I'm a good person, people can see I'm a good person. I think a lot of the time you can tell the levels of sincerity that they have towards the cause. If they can tell that they're doing it for a genuinely good reason, if they seem committed to it, that's fine. But usually tell if someone's doing something, you can tell that that's not really, they don't mean that as much. But if they're going out of their way to run a marathon to raise money, they can't just be doing that to showboat, really. So they were trapped in this idea that because some people would be using social media in a way to show off, there was a worry that everyone would be using it to show off. It also, one story that stuck in my head, one story that stuck in my head was a young man who said that two young women at his college got into an actual physical fight because one of them didn't share. One of them's grandmother had died, and she was doing some fundraising to raise money for the cause that she died from. And they got into a fight because the friend didn't share the post on Facebook. There's this feeling that you're not showing that you're a good enough friend to me. This sort of demonstration of friendness was diluted by the fact that someone was using social media in the wrong way. And that speaks very much to this context collapse argument, the idea that you can't control how everybody is going to respond to your post. And so when you're putting stuff out there, you then sort of might have real world consequences or create real world feelings. If that's problematic. I shouldn't be saying real world, actually. I should be saying away from keyboard, at keyboard and away from keyboard is apparently the better way of talking about this than online or offline. Given that we're now all online semi-permanently, there should be times when we're talking about being at keyboard or away from keyboard is apparently the literary way of talking about it. And that was the real world crossover argument. I think in the chat earlier, John had asked about the impact of parents. And definitely the overwhelming message they got was still charity messages and fundraising requests are so much better when they come from people you love, trust, and respect. Random messages, as might come up in a feed if you follow an organization, even, or if your family member follows an organization, don't feel quite right. That sort of authenticity is missing. And everyone online is searching maybe for that authenticity. It's a deeply inauthentic space at times. And so in that search for authenticity, you're looking for things to be shared by people that you like. If I'm going to do something, it should have a small amount of belief in it, or I want it to succeed, as opposed to something I've never had any interesting or knowledge of. It would be hypocritical otherwise. So I think my advice to charities in this space is always encourage your supporters. If they're sharing stuff online, don't just retweet. Add some context about why this is important to you. It can just be a line or two. But if you're encouraging your supporters to share a new fundraising drive you're doing, saying, please, everyone, take 2 minutes to read this fundraising drive. It's incredibly important to me because, and actually that will have a much deeper emotional connection with the people who follow them on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, wherever, than if you just share it without any context added. You know, it's the difference between retweeting and quote tweeting. If you quote tweet with some added contextual information about why it's important to you, that's more likely, this evidence always suggests, going to cut through than anything else. Also, because if there's this argument about retweet if you agree, it's like, now I don't want to because you're telling me to. This idea that even the best message, even this amazing uplifting story about overcoming cancer, for instance, if you tell me to retweet it, I don't want to, because I don't like being told what to do. I don't like having someone else try and curate my public image in that way. I just think that to retweet that retweet, I just think people that do retweet it because they don't want to look bad, not because they care. This idea that we're suffering from this social pressure to share messages that they don't particularly believe in is hugely problematic. If you want to read more about this, and I can share these two resources with you. There's an article I wrote for Voluntary Sector Review, which is available online, called Student Perceptions and Experience of Charity on Social Media. And that very much focuses on what works and what doesn't work. So this issue of authenticity and this issue of things coming from random sources versus things coming from people you love, respect, or trust, and actually celebrities, and how the right celebrity attached to the right cause can obviously appeal to a certain number of fans, but is going to alienate people who aren't fans of them. And then in my book, The Good Glow, there was a chapter on humble brags and the good giving self on social media, which was much more about that sort of worry that young people have about presenting themselves in certain ways. In terms of, and open it up for discussion, I think there's a couple of comments in the chat that I can respond to. The methodology was an experiment that I think didn't really work. The systems, the actual platforms, don't make it very easy to create fakes of themselves. So, for instance, that Twitter feed that you looked at had 0 followers and was following 0. And even if I bumped that up a little bit, it would be really difficult to do it, make it look right. And because you're having to bring everything into your feed yourself, trying to make it named the right way is quite difficult. Maybe asking people actually to explore their own feeds, to actually log on to their own social media, then use that as a jumping off point, would actually have been a more iterative and realistic approach to doing digital ethnography. It did work as a way of showing people. So one of the things that we often find in qualitative research is when you do you remember the no makeup selfie, and people are like, no, not really, because you want them to talk about it, and you're like, okay, I'm going to have to explain it to you, and then everything that they say about it comes filtered through how you've explained it in the first place. Whereas that this is at least a more neutral way of providing prompts and providing information to people, because that's connected to how much information people might actually get about something online. So I would like to do this again. There's a big project at the minute online, sponsored by the Economic and Social Research Council, called The Digital Good. They have a lot of money to explore how the digital can help us build a better society. And I think we don't have a lot of knowledge about fundraising platforms. The thing that I think would be good, and please tell me if I'm wrong about this, is we don't actually know how people fundraise. So let's say I'm running the Sheffield Marathon in September and I set up a Just Giving page. We don't actually know how people use those pages. We know that when they set up the page, and we know how much money they recruit. We don't actually know how many times they share it, who they share it to, how they share it. We don't know their feelings about how they share it. We don't know whether they feel like they're showing off by sharing it many different times. We don't know whether they're worried that they're spreading it around too much. We don't know whether those sort of realities of how individuals do fundraising for causes that they're attached to is sort of a bit of a black box. We sort of just assume that people are doing the best that they can. Whereas actually, I'm sure we've all sponsored people before where it turns out that they've actually only sent us the form afterwards because they forgot that they were meant to be raising money for that sort of thing and things. There's some people go mad for it and will do lots and lots of sponsored events leading up to it in order to raise as much money as possible. So I think that's a more interesting way of understanding how people use digital platforms. And the other one and it's a bit of an American thing, but the idea of crowdfunding. Especially in America, where people will crowdfund for operations, for medicines, for college tuition and things. I think that's a really interesting, that very individual, personal, philanthropic adventures that people are going on. I think that's something that needs looking at as an understanding as quite a modern phenomenon, perhaps quite a dark and worrisome phenomenon, especially when we look at America and we look at the lack of healthcare that a lot of people have. And suddenly you're saying, well, can people donate $5 so I can get a kidney transplant? And that sort of thing is quite an interesting use of social media to do something charitable, but that to many people's eyes in Europe just looks quite unhuman, I suppose, or inhumane. As I said, I can share these slides with anybody who wants them. There's lots of references there, but there are more as well, and I'm very excited to discuss it with you more widely.